Why is GST increased in Singapore? GST hike is supposed to help the ordinary Singaporeans, but I don't know why there are still many Singaporeans every day crying father, crying mother that the government is suppressing the poor because of GST. Just look at the GST in Sweden. It's 25%, but Singapore is only 9% at most, at least for the next few years. Some other countries even worse. Some may say that Sweden doesn't have old people or retirees working, but in Singapore, many old people are collecting cardboards, selling ice cream, and working in hawker centers. But is that the case? Shouldn't Singapore increase the GST like Sweden 25% too? So what's so bad about GST? You see my point? And talking about Sweden, do you know how the government uses the taxes? When you hear this, it will be very shocking. They use the excess to help home the refugees. This is the stupidest thing to do. When I was there, I went to the refugee centers, and what I saw was a lot of them were trying to apply for citizenship. Moreover, in Sweden, there are still many beggars around. But luckily, our Singapore government doesn't behave this way. The GST increase is based on how to help low-income families adequately, accordingly, and appropriately instead of using it to pay for any kind of silly policy unwisely. So, in what way until now did our Singapore government shows profligate spending and irresponsible and unsustainable plans to raise taxes? No, right? It was because there are a lot of rich people spending in Singapore, and this is why the Singapore government needs to balance the situation for the low-income family adequately, accordingly, and appropriately. Do you see my point? Moreover, I don't see many old people collecting cardboards in Singapore, but a lot of them are dancing in some community centers. So who should be the one to hate the GST the most? And they don't benefit from it at all. It's the rich people, because they are the ones who can afford to buy a lot of expensive things more than the ordinary people. So why should the ordinary Singaporeans need to cry father and cry mothers and make so much noise? The one to be unhappy should be those high-income families, because they have the money to buy anything they want, even for massage and KTV every day. So in Singapore, GST is not used to benefit the rich, but the low-income families. Firstly, GST in Singapore is considered very low in the world. Secondly, the Singapore government is not corrupt, so they will not misuse the GST. And thirdly, there are a lot of Singaporeans are enjoying high incomes. This is why there's a need to increase GST to help low-income families. Because of this, some rich people like Hsien Yang are trying to stir emotion and create anger in ordinary people against the government. They said they care for the people, but in reality, they only care for themselves. The Singapore Unfilial Sun said this in his post.
The PAP government will raise GST by 14.3% with another similar rise a year later, making a total increase of 28.6%.
It's only 1 to 2% increase in GST, but it's purposely used 1/7 to become 14.3% to stir public anger, and then 28.6% to blow the situation bigger to create social unrest among Singaporeans. Do you know what's the difference between Hsien Loong and Hsien Yang? One is tall, but the other is low-key. Where in the world will any government give GST rebates and money to ordinary people every time because of GST? Only the Singapore government did this so far. The Singapore government is using GST mainly to help support social welfare, children education, healthcare, and the old people. Only a corrupt government will increase GST when the country is not progressing and many poor people and beggars around. Hence, GST can be a double-edged sword for an undeveloped third world countries where you can see a lot of beggars and a lot of poor people. It's corruption, but for a country like Singapore, well-developed, GST is meant to save the low-income families. You see my point? Remember to hit subscribe, like, and share. Bye.